Welcome to the PRsonal Podcast, the podcast where we get to meet the real person behind the professional. I am your host, Charlotte Nichols, and I'm really happy to welcome Ashleigh King to the studio today. Ashleigh is a podcast producer, host, and trainer at Flamingo Heights. So, Ashleigh, where were you when you first found out that your best friend was murdered?
Sure. So I was at work. I was about to deliver some training to a team of new starters. And I was 21 and I was at work, and it had been this crazy bank holiday weekend of a night out with my friend Joe and all these wonderful memories of clubbing and things. And it's just been such a busy weekend. I was working for this organization that had opened a new store in Leeds. So it just been so busy. There'd been a lot going on. So anyway, I went into work. I was there to deliver some training, and I got this phone call, and I said, excuse me, we'll start in a minute. I just need to go take this phone call. So I take the phone call, and it's like, hello, it's DC, whoever it was. So I knew it was a police person, and they said, something about Joe. And I was thinking, oh, right, okay, how can I help you? But it was like, well, what has he done now? Like I didn't know what this call was about. And they said, he's dead. And I just kind of, my legs went underneath me and buckled. Yeah. And I was just like, he's dead? What? I just couldn't understand. My brain wasn't able to process that information.
Is that exactly how they delivered it?
Yeah, they did. And I don't know what training they're given, and I don't know if they can tell you something like that on the phone. But in any case, we were in Newcastle. They were in Leeds, and they said, you've got to get to Leeds. You need to come now. We need to question you. And I was meant to do all this training and stuff, and I was just thinking, okay. It was the most weird moment of life that I can think about.
Oh my goodness, I can't believe it was just delivered to you in that way.
Yeah.
What was the first thought that went through your mind?
The first thought I went through my mind was, I was devastated. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't understand why or how or why that had happened, or for what reason could he be dead. I was worried. I was anxious. I mean, I didn't know the circumstances. And so I was really freaked out. They didn't want to tell me anything on the phone, so I had to go to Leeds anyway. But also, I didn't realize it was a murder investigation. So that became the first of several weeks of assisting the police with their inquiry, but also that meant sitting and actually going through police questioning for 3 weeks.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Horrendous to go through that, but then to go through that.
Yeah. I think it's at 21 years old, and I was just turned 21. No one tells you how to interact with the police anyway, but to answer questions in an investigation where you want to be helpful. So Joe was gay, and he was my best friend, and we'd moved from Newcastle to Leeds. So for the police, I had this kind of, I was someone they could use as a bridge to the people in Newcastle and the people in Leeds who knew his life in a multifaceted way. So the questions that they were asking were, who last did he see? Was he dating anyone? Because they were exploring every avenue of their investigation.
Even yourself.
Yeah, including myself, including my friendship circle, including my ex-boyfriend, and that was really hard to think. But what I'm saying as well is, I don't think I realized at the time they were looking at me.
Yeah.
And I don't think as a 21-year-old you have the maturity to go, this is how you should interact, or don't say this, or you could implicate yourself in this way, or so it's quite a unique experience to go through.
And especially you'll be managing so many different feelings that you hadn't felt before, like extreme grief, and also almost being treated like a suspect.
Yes. Well, yeah.
Horrendous.
Yeah.
Oh,
Exactly.
So are you okay to describe what happened that fateful night?
Absolutely. So so the difficult thing is Joe was meant to be in Newcastle with his family, having a wonderful bank holiday weekend. Because I was in Newcastle over the summer and I was going to Leeds to open a new store for something, he and I had agreed that he would stay in Leeds and he'd go clubbing, and we went to Gatecrasher and we had the best night. So I think what had happened was he'd stayed behind, he'd had a great night with this clubbing, he'd partied for a few days, he was just chilling, and what had happened was there was a window in the basement. This guy had got into the basement through this window, and he was in a heroin frenzy where he needed to get more drugs to fuel his addiction, and so to do that he was burglarizing different homes. And it was the Leeds festival because it was a bank holiday weekend. So in Leeds, a lot of those homes are empty because it's the summer or it's Leeds festival. So I think he hoped for an easy find of some things. He actually only sold one bike and sold it for £10. And that was the value of Joe's life.
Oh my goodness.
But what happened was he found Joe, and it was multiple stabbings, and I don't know what it was like for my beautiful friend in those final moments. I think as a survivor, as someone I was meant to sleep over that night, I wonder sometimes what it would be like. Would it have been different? And that hurts so much, but I wasn't there, and I just think it took me a long time to work out how, because I'm a person of faith, but how that could happen, you know, to such a wonderful person. And his mum once said, you know, he wasn't anywhere he shouldn't have been. He wasn't in a dark alley doing something bad. He was in a student home. So I think that was really hard. But also he was alone because it was a bank holiday weekend, and so the sad thing about that is that the alarm was going for a very long time, and so there were multiple calls to the police to investigate the alarm and do a welfare check, because I think it had been going for 2 days.
Right.
So somehow I think when the burglar had left, or when he'd broken in, perhaps he'd set off some kind of alarm. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, it's just horrifying. I can't imagine. Poor you, 21.
Yeah.
All the not only the grief, all the thought processes that you had to process.
Yeah.
Horrendous.
Yeah. It was a very searching time, shall we say?
Oh, I imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think back to kind of your last moments with Joe, last conversations you had and things like that?
Yeah, so we'd been on this night out and we'd had a great time. And I think I saw him later because he sort of came over and I was in my pajamas and I didn't have any makeup on, and he said something strange like, "You're so beautiful even without makeup," or I can't remember what it was. But I was like, he sort of made me promise to always be kind to myself, or I can't remember the final words, but I think I was going through quite a hard time anyway in my life, and he sort of made me promise that I'd always take care of myself, which I think that is such a strange thing given what then happened a few days later.
It's quite profound. You often hear things like that.
Yeah.
So they get a sense.
Well, it was so kind, the things he said, but it was very out of the blue.
Yeah.
So it was a strange experience to hear. You know, sometimes your mates don't say things, but then it was just very heartwarming and slushy, I guess.
Almost, you know, they feel those things, but they never say it.
Yeah. So I don't know why that was our last conversation, but it was very loving and like, you know, oh, you're my best friend. You're my best friend. Love you loads kind of thing.
I'm so glad it was so loving.
Yeah. I mean, we had texted a bit, and he'd said he was really tired, and you know, he'd had a great weekend and stuff. So, I mean, he was disturbed in just his dressing gown, so I guess he was sleeping. You know.
And you hope that he didn't wake up. You know.
Oh no, he was definitely awake. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just horrific. And how did the situation affect you?
So I was studying journalism at the time. I was 21. I really wanted to be a music journalist. I wanted to be the next Alexa Chung or Fern Cotton, going and talking to bands and asking them why they love music and just going around festivals.
I've always thought that'd be a cool job.
That was like my dream. And so I was applying to BBC internships and stuff like that. But I had been doing some work over that summer on like running the store, and it was great. But I think for me at that point, I couldn't do journalism and I couldn't do Leeds. I couldn't be in Leeds. It wasn't safe for me.
I understand.
Yeah, and I just as someone who already had pre-existing trauma through child trauma and surviving through that, I couldn't be around a place that had this kind of energy for me, and so I really just locked down. It actually probably a lot of things that I'd buried with previous trauma was then brought to the surface. So I was in a state of I don't know what the term would be. I was in a very bad state. Yeah, I was so scared. Nightmares, just flashbacks, being terrified in everyday life. You know, it was horrendous.
Yeah, just constantly fearing for your safety.
Yeah, exactly. I think I was very fortunate because although I'd had a job and it was going well, once things happened with Joe, I wasn't in the place that I needed to be. But I've always loved Nando's and they've always loved me. And so I love the buzz of a restaurant. And I think having a job like that where I could just go and wait tables and go home and have no responsibility, that kind of rebuilt myself a little bit in a time where I just needed to heal.
I can totally relate to that. I went through something when I was younger, much less traumatic, but ended up working in a leisure centre and I totally had that same experience. It became my sanctuary in a crazy way, even though you're dealing with the general public moaning at you. It was just like, it's just nice to deal with small problems, you know? And,
absolutely, yeah.
What other coping strategies did you develop?
So I think for me, it's not a good coping strategy, but at the time, drinking. I was probably drinking too much, just to forget.
You're at that age though, aren't you? That's kind of, in a sad way, all you're taught as a coping mechanism when you're in your early 20s. Yeah,
absolutely. So yeah, drinking at the time, that was probably it, and partying. I think that, I'd probably say more the drinking than the partying, like being at home cozy with booze. I think general coping strategies I use every day. I know we're going to cover it in some of your questions anyway, but I think at that time it was probably alcohol.
You're so self-unaware at that age as well.
Yeah.
You go through all of that. Did you have close friends and a support network to help you?
So the challenge for me is that all of my friendships, circles and leads were also being investigated. So we were all regularly going in and different people and people who weren't even connected to Joe or who had never met him. And it was horrible to hear some of the stories. I mean, some of his friends were sleeping in a room together, like 6 of them in one room with all their duvets together, like all their heads just cuddled up, all 6 of them in the living room because they couldn't sleep in their own bedrooms. They were so scared. Yeah. And I missed out that stuff because I was home at Newcastle with my mom. But I think for some of my friends, they experience a very different coping, or they had to deal with the fact that they were living in a shared house and the house was a crime scene. So, all of that stuff. Yeah, exactly. So you can't. So normally the house is a crime scene and it might be blocked off for a month, 2 months. So all your clothes, all your things. So all of these various friends were then housed by the police into different places, or they stayed with friends. But this is what I'm saying. They kind of all sat in one living room sleeping together because they were too scared. So having to deal with that, but also the fallout of... So I went to a different university to Joe.
Okay.
Even though we'd both moved from Newcastle to Leeds. But for his friends who were getting questions every day by people who knew him, I can't imagine how that was for them.
Oh, yeah. Horrendous. And how long did it take before they finally found the murderer?
I can't recall the exact dates. I feel like the police did a really good job, even though it was hard going through the question. I think it was within about 2 months.
Still a long time though, isn't it?
It is. It might have been earlier. It might have been that they did it in 5 weeks. So he had been asking some questions when he went to get his methadone at the pharmacy. Like, have you heard anything about this thing? Or, have you seen this thing on the news? And so he'd said a few things that had made the pharmacist concerned, and I think that had been reported, and that was one of the ways they'd kind of figured it out.
Oh, I'm so glad that pharmacist was vigilant.
Yeah.
Oh, despicable. Did he get the punishment he deserves?
I find it really hard, this one, because he got 25 years minimum serving for a life sentence. But I don't know how you put a price on someone's life. And I think when someone's young, and so they just about to live the most beautiful, I think Joe was going to turn 21, he hadn't yet. But it's just to be so young and they've got this world ahead of them, and he didn't get to graduate, he didn't get to do those things. So how do you put a price on someone's life? How do you put a sentence on someone's life? And for me, I think I don't know how I feel about the sentence, but he's died. So so he's actually died in jail. Right. I think he developed a heart problem, and he died. So he served at least 10 years, and I'm very thrilled that he got to do that, because what made me very upset when I did first find out about him is that he already had committed is a grievous bodily harm. So he was actually out, and he should have been in jail. And this is where I think I was really upset, because we have societal issues like overcrowding in prisons. We have problems. I mean, I have ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, recently diagnosed in 2020. A lot of people with that condition have impulse problems. And so if you look at people in prisons, a lot of people in prisons have ADHD.
Yes, I learned that recently.
Yeah, and so I wonder if there were other interventions in this man's life at some point, if he had had better economic opportunities than stealing, or would this have happened?
I don't know the answer to this, as I'm sure you don't, and society doesn't. And then are people just inherently evil and all that? And apparently no. But it's just so tragic, though. It does seem so terribly unfair. Yeah. How did you feel when you found out he died? Did you feel that was almost getting off lightly?
Well, actually, I didn't know the circumstances. I only, through researching for today's episode, found out about his heart condition. Right. I wasn't sure if maybe he'd been taken out in prison in some way, through some kind of feud, or in which case I might have felt, well, maybe that is fair. Maybe he got his just end. But I think to hurt somebody who's vulnerable and who is pure and wholesome, multiple stabbings, to me, I'm glad he's dead.
I just didn't know, with your religious beliefs, if you felt that almost he'd be in a better place now than kind of suffering in a prison cell.
I guess for me, it depends if you believe in an afterlife and where, because perhaps he would be in hell, in which case, then good for him. He's in a worse place, experiencing worse pain than being in a jail.
Yeah.
So, but I'm not really sure what I feel about heaven and hell.
Yeah, that was going to be a question almost. Like, what do you think happens when you die? And, have you ever even tried to reach out to Joe since?
I haven't tried to reach out to Joe because for me, I'm very spiritual and I'm into crystals but I'm also a Christian.
Yes.
So I think it's a for a lot of Christians, that's a weird thing. It's like you've let in a new age thing. And so it's not a popular belief system. But for me, it's about having faith. And actually, my spirituality has brought me closer to God because it's shown me God in a different way.
Yes.
So for me, I haven't reached out to Joe because I don't personally believe in inviting entities or energies into your life from the other realms.
Yes.
But I have felt him, and I have, been in my beautiful studio that I have such a joy to run. I've felt his presence. One of the things I love about Joe, and I want to honor him always with, is we had this dream of having a coffee space where all of his art would be on the walls, and he would DJ and like have music on, like house beats or something, and then I would make gorgeous salads and like food or whatever, but I do the hosting that I love. And it's not quite the same thing, but I feel that what I've created with my studio is this kind of like place that people can come and bring themselves and have a great time. And yes, we make podcasts, but it's an experience they come in for. But there's art on the walls, and so I feel like there's a lot of he was an art student studying fine art,
right? And
for me, having that kind of very creative visual thing around me is really special.
Yes, and I've been to your studio, and you do get a special feeling about the place, so I totally agree.
I think one thing I would say that I've realised, which has helped me, now I've realised it, but for a long time I went through a phase of mentoring young males. I don't know why, I just kept attracting the same kind of 18 to 22 year old young creative who was lost, who needed help with their confidence and guidance. And it was always a young 22. It must have been relating to Joe and feeling like a connection with Joe.
Yes.
And so I've mentored a lot of different people of different backgrounds and genders. And I have noticed that there's at least 5 people that I have mentored who are incredible artists, but they have some kind of connection to Joe. And so now I've realized that. I'm so grateful for that learning, but I'm able to say, I don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So there's been quite a lot of healing there.
Yes.
And I think the survivor guilt is something a lot of people don't think about. So if he was meant to be in Newcastle with his family, but he chose to be in Leeds clubbing because I was there that weekend.
Yes.
And I was meant to be there that night, but I was called back to work, and that's why I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Then what would it be like? Would I have died? Would he have survived? Maybe we would have been hospitalized, but we would have both been here. Yeah. I think for a long time, that survivor guilt held me stuck. And that was my choice. But it's like, he didn't get to graduate. He was gay, but he could have adopted kids. But like, he doesn't get to have that family. So milestones for me were quite difficult, and friendships for me still are difficult, because you can love and care so much about a friend, but they can go. Yeah. It's a really horrible thing to say. You
struggle to invest because you think, well, you could just be taken from me.
Exactly. And so that's something I'm still working on in therapy and things. But I think with survival guilt, with milestones and reaching stuff, I'm better at that now. I've been able to move forward in my own life in ways that I really wanted to, like being a mom.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about that later.
Yeah.
But yeah, it brings up all sorts of emotions anyway when you become a mom. So I can imagine it's a very difficult time.
Yeah.
What are your favourite memories of Joe?
We used to do this thing where I'd meet him at Monument, and we'd go for Monument in Newcastle. and we go for what we'd call a pint convo, which was just, we would just go and whinge and talk about boys. And it would usually be like a cheap pint of cider or something. And I think sometimes what I do, and I might do this today because I've kept this afternoon free because I knew I was doing these recordings. I might go and visit him. So I visit him at his grave in Newcastle. I don't want to say where just for privacy, but I sometimes go and have a little sit down and just have a little drink with him and have a pint convo, and I tell him about my life. It's a very one-sided conversation, but it's a really lovely feeling to go and honor him and see his space. And I might go see his mom, or I'll often take flowers and things. It was quite hard at one point where there were lots of sort of feelings of moving forward. I found it quite hard to see his family because I felt, how can I say, oh, I've got married, or I've got this little girl, or this happened, if they don't have that, you know? And so, but there's been lots of healing, and I think it's all good. But yeah, for me, it's just seeing Joe at Monument, where he would always wear the most crazy clashing clothes, like a true artist.
Yes.
And I loved it.
Oh.
So I just see him there with this little wave, and it makes me smile.
Oh, do you still dream about him?
Sometimes, yeah.
Does it bring you comfort or sadness?
Yeah, no, comfort, yeah. Mm-hmm. It's usually something very fun and like hearty. I'm very grateful that the nightmares have ceased.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
So were they happening on a regular basis?
Yeah. Yeah, so pretty much nightly. But I think that's the thing, is if anyone's had trauma of any kind, when you don't realize that for any of us right now, you don't know what's coming in life. There could be something really traumatic around the corner. It could be family member becomes ill. It could be that there's a traffic accident that you witnessed. You could be, all sorts of things can happen. And I think it very quickly pulls your entire life upside down. And I think that that is something to just be mindful of for anyone. If that happens and your whole world comes upside down, it brings up other stuff, get help, speak to someone, because you can't always navigate it yourself, and alcohol is not the answer. Yeah.
Oh, that is really good advice.
Definitely.
Yeah. But yeah, you're just at the mercy of this unknown force, aren't you, called life?
Yeah, exactly.
You never know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
It almost teaches you as well just to try and let go a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because, obviously you still want to control what you can, control the input, surrender to the output, and just let life flow and react to how you can.
Exactly.
Stories are at the heart of the Personal Podcast, and we're so grateful for everyone who comes on and shares them. Stories are also at the heart of a strong PR campaign. And at Harvey and Hugo, we believe that everyone's story deserves a chance to be heard. That's why we're on a mission to give you a voice amplified through the power of story. Our stories are shared in the form of press releases, social media, content marketing, videography, photography, animation, graphic design, and podcasting. Our stories aren't just heard, they're shared, watched, clicked, but most importantly, they are felt. It's this stirring of emotions that cuts through the noise to light fires within people and activate them towards your purpose. So one question for you: are you ready to share your story? Harvey and Hugo, your voice amplified.
And I noticed the book on the table.
Yes.
We talked about healing.
Yeah.
What role did kind of crystals play in your healing?
Yeah, sure. So I actually only discovered crystals recently. So what happened with Joe was around 2009. In 2020, during the pandemic, I was very, very unwell. I started, so I was doing a master's in business administration and MBA at Newcastle Uni Business School, and I had the greatest year for the first 6 months, and then COVID happened. Mm-hmm. So I'm someone who thrives on busyness and people. And so I was getting so much stimulation from my course, and I just adored it. And I was interacting with hundreds of students a day. And then COVID happened and I was at home by myself, like many people, just with a computer screen. And so I feel that I was also undiagnosed ADHD, and I had complex post-traumatic stress disorder I was dealing with. And so I really was very poorly. I had mumps twice. No, sorry. I had 2 ear infections. I had mumps and I had COVID twice in like this space. And this is before the vaccines and everything. And I just was feeling horrendous, but I had to do this really hard, intensive MBA. And I was running a business that was an events company that lost its income overnight. So there was all this stress. Stressful. And my mental health was on the floor. I didn't want to be here. I was actively thinking about what I could do about that. And that's when I actually got my ADHD diagnosis. I saw something online in the middle of the night and I thought, oh, wow, I think I have ADHD. And I contacted a private place after finding out the 3-year waiting list for the NHS, which is much longer now.
Oh, yeah.
But I was in such a state that I just put it on a credit card to get private support, and I was on meds within 3 days, and I think it saved my life. So what I would say about that time is, firstly, I recognize how privileged it is to be able to have a credit card, because not everybody can, to be able to pay for that. And get it sorted. I'm still paying it off now, but it was a valid thing. I think
saved your life.
It did, but I think for me, crystals were a way to understand the world around me and to connect with something physical, and to calm and balance. So journaling, meditation, saging. If you've done any saging.
I do some saging, yes. I'm into it all.
Yeah. I think clearing your energy. So I've got loads of great crystal tips, but my favorite is if you ever need some money in your business, at home, if things are feeling tight, for anyone, clean your house. It's the strangest thing, because by cleaning your house, you're making space for new energy. Okay, so if you're sitting around with loads of trash, and it's the same with your handbag or anything in your life, if you've just got like messy, broken things, they're just taking up space. But that space could be filled by beautiful new things, and it doesn't have to be physically new. It's just abundant, rich, lovely things. So sometimes when we're going through trauma, or we're going through a hard time, or whether we've been hurt or broken up with, or we've got stuff like we all do, I feel that sometimes when you're struggling with your self-worth, you surround yourself with broken things, broken plates, broken holy clothes, and actually you can darn those clothes, you can stitch them up, you can upcycle them, you could put a patch on, you can pass them on, you can, but actually we are so special to be here. We're so lucky to be here. We only get one life. And Joe's not here, but I can live my life and remember him and have a great time, because he can't. Yes. So for me, why would I hold myself in this space of unworthiness? And so I love that tip. If you can clean your house and just get stuff like fresh, you're just making space for new stuff.
Oh, I totally agree. And as someone who's just moved house out of, quite a traumatic situation, dealing with it, I felt so much better, even though it was very traumatic, the process of moving out. Now that I am in a new space, and again, I can feel I've moved into my parents' house with my children, which is lovely in so many ways, but it's not my own space. It's not my own energy, which sounds weird. And my parents would think, oh, you're being so dramatic, but I kind of need to make it that. It doesn't just happen overnight. And so
but I think anyone can. So I've been in similar situations where you're like, oh gosh, how am I here again, back in my mom's house, or this kind of thing. And it's amazing what you can do with some fairy lights and just, flowers. And I use a lot of dried flowers because they don't die and they're so pretty. But there's just so many ways you can make something special. But I just feel sometimes we surround ourselves with broken things when we're going through a rough time.
When now you're saying that, I think about it. But then also it's like the energies, the auras in the room as well. And I think, you could be things, not the nicest living situations, but you're surrounded by love.
Yes.
I'm not saying my parents' house is lovely. I'm not saying it's not a nice living situation, but it's just surrounded by love and the people in it, and transforming yourself out of that old place.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And I've brought you a book. I'm going to lend it to you. But
Oh,
this
my
is
goodness.
one of my favorite. I love crystal books, but this is called Inner Beauty Bible. So I'm someone who, I'm going through a weird time in my life as a woman. Everyone is talking about Botox or there's so much pressure for aesthetics, and I like to look nice. I'm on camera a lot. So I like to have my nails done, or I like to, have lashes or do I want to feel pretty, but to me, inner beauty is the most important thing.
I totally agree.
Yeah. And I feel that I love this book because it's so many rituals or steps you can do for inner beauty, but that involve crystals and really nurturing practices.
Right on my screen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So, but yeah, I think I know we were talking about crystals, but my point is, I think for me, it's an act of love and self-care that they bring into my life. Yeah.
I totally believe that. And you let me borrow some crystals actually when I last saw you, and a lovely book, which I read and really, really enjoyed it. But actually, I think I told you that, one of the crystals, because I was going through a difficult time, it just really helped me. And, people might think I'm crazy saying that. And, sometimes I would like hold it through the night.
Yeah.
And it just helped me feel better.
I have many times held, especially rose quartz, which is good for love. If you're feeling any kind of pain, especially if someone's been through trauma or loss or grief, then you hold pain. And women, we hold pain in our hips, we hold it in our bodies, and we never let it go. And I think there's been many times I've cried myself to sleep holding a crystal, but it's the release it offers. And what I love about them is they are centuries old. They have seen so many things, and yet they're still here.
Yes.
And
essentially, they're almost made of the stars.
Yeah, they are.
Well, I suppose we all are, aren't we?
But also, if you think, I love the quote about diamonds, they're made under pressure, and they're so beautiful. So we are all what our story makes us. And so, I just think they for me a way to feel alive and to connect with myself and to project something onto them, I guess.
Yeah, no, I love it. And thank you. I can't wait to read that book. Just kind of the final topic, I thought we'd discuss, you mentioned that you have a daughter now.
Yes, yeah.
What's it like trying to run a business, having a newborn baby? Were you able to take maternity leave? All of those things that you have to consider when you run a business and you decide you want to have children.
Yeah, so I always wanted to be a mom since I was 2.
Oh.
I always had dollies, and I've always remembered wanting to be a mom. When I was 14 at school, when I moved to the UK, they asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, a wife and a mom. And they bullied me at school because they were like, you've got no ambition, no goals. So I kind of internalized that, and then almost tried to be this career woman, and everything to me was my career. And for me, I am a workaholic.
I can relate to both those things you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think being a workaholic, I didn't realize, is an addiction, and it's a trauma thing. So being busy is a trauma symptom.
Yeah.
So I distracted myself and spent all this time on external work and things and status and things like that were important to me. But I desperately wanted to be a mom, and I felt so lonely in my heart about it, and I just had this love to give. And I used to find it so hard going through a store and hearing babies cry, because I felt like they were calling and I wanted to have a baby to respond to. It was a strange thing. I hated Mother's Days. I hated Christmas birthdays. I stopped celebrating my birthday. I would delete my Facebook or deactivate it every year so I didn't get Facebook birthday messages, because I was like, 1 year older and I'm not a mom. And so, but I was blocking my blessings because I was working so much.
Yes.
So what I did do is I worked really hard on my self through things like crystals, through using journaling and neurolinguistic programming, NLP, hypnosis. I am a master coach in those things myself, but also have benefited from those as well. Yeah. And I feel that all of that work to heal then made it possible that I was able to have Autumn.
I can relate to a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think for me, she is the biggest blessing, the best thing that's ever happened to me. But I don't think people would ever understand the work that it's taken to be able to have a child. I call her my miracle baby, not because it was hard to fall pregnant. I was very grateful that things happened the way they did for me, but she is a miracle, because for me to overcome the trauma, particularly sexual trauma, to get there, I didn't ever think my body would be used in that way. And when I gave birth, I feel like I reclaimed my whole body. It was the most painful but beautiful experience. And yeah, I really feel there's something special about that, having been a trauma survivor to then become a mom. It's just a really beautiful experience.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, becoming a mom is a totally life-changing, not just physically life-changing, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it was like having gone through so much trauma in the first place. And one of my questions I was going to ask earlier was losing Joe the most traumatic thing that's happened to you?
No, it's not. So I have to be careful what I say here, just out of respect to family and personal circumstances. But I have, as a child, I experienced trauma where I was assaulted, and as an 18-year-old, I was assaulted, and there are various other times where, I mean, in Leeds, for example, being dragged down an alley, there have been instances where I have been assaulted.
Oh,
I think one thing I would say is, when you have trauma, and I wish there were more trauma-informed people, because I think people see young girls who are drinking or partying or who are dressed a certain way, and they see them as putting themselves out there in a way. But if you've never known another way, or if your self-worth is attached to your sexuality, then isn't that normal?
And I really struggle with that when people say, "Oh, well, you're kind of pushing yourself into it, you're asking for it." They don't say anything about the man, the person responsible, not always men, that's done the crime. I really struggle with that.
Yeah, so I think, so for me, yes, there has been other trauma, and they've sort of all kind of made a really big soup. And I think this is where, when you heal, you don't only heal yourself, you heal the people around you. But with my daughter now, I was so scared to become a mother, because I didn't want to have somebody go through more trauma. I think we have a lot of people around us in our communities who are experiencing generational trauma, where maybe the same patterns are happening in families. And that was something I want to be a trailblazer. I want to be a pattern breaker in my generation and my family. And for me, it was a non-negotiable. Before I have a child, I need to fix those things. So when we talked about 2020 and the struggles I had, that was my, I guess, spiritual awakening of, this is what I need to do to heal. One thing that I found really interesting was, I'd kind of put a lot of things to do with Joe and pain down in my heart. I'd buried things down to just cope and get through. But when I learned in neurolinguistic programming, NLP, we talk about how your mind is there to protect you, and it serves you memories. Its role is to protect your memories, and it will hide things from you until you're at a place where you're safe enough to deal with it. Which I didn't know that. So it actually represses your memories, but it also will give you things when you're ready to heal, which is why sometimes things can be wonderful. Life can just be perfect. Everything's going so well. And then for some reason, you get some kind of emotional stuff come up. Yes. And it's because you're now ready and in a safe space to deal with it.
Oh, that's so interesting. Because I've often noticed that delayed reaction, almost delayed response. And, even like sometimes one of the first stages of grief, anger, denial, and then you just crack on. It gives you that kind of power to crack on. And you just, it's crazy, the mind. We know so little about it.
Yeah.
But so autumn has helped heal you.
Yeah,
on that
for
journey.
sure. Yeah.
And how did you struggle, also being a self-confessed workaholic? Did you take a maternity leave?
Yes, I did. But I didn't. So
Yes.
I think I did 3 weeks. I wasn't going into the office every day, but I had to go in and out all the time.
Yeah.
It's hard when you're self-employed.
So hard.
And when you're running a physical space and when you have team members. Actually, my husband's been wonderful. He has been running my business for me.
Amazing.
So I was so grateful to have that support. And he's taken a bit of a back step now, but yeah, he's definitely been a godsend. So I did have maternity leave, but I mean, I was back at work using strategic keeping in touch days.
Yes.
For from 3 months in. So she was at nursery really early, but she loves it and she's great. She's super popular. They love her. She's now 4 days a week. She was 2 days at first. And a lot of people were quite shocked at how early I put her in, but it was a needs must.
How early?
So it was about 3 or 4 months. Yeah.
I mean,
So,
it's what you have to do sometimes.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no judgment.
Yeah.
I luckily had family around me for my first lovely daughter, and I returned to work after 3 months, but I could rely on family initially.
Yeah.
Whereas if I didn't, it didn't have them around.
Yeah. I mean, nurseries are great. She gets to do so many cool, fun activities and they're messy. And then she comes home and I don't have to do that, which is great. And she gets fed really well at nursery. So
yes, and I'm not great at cooking.
Yeah.
So that was a bonus.
Yeah, but it's all the, I think it was hard. I mean, it was lovely snuggling with her all day. I found it pretty stressful breastfeeding a baby and looking after a baby, but trying to be on my phone and say, well, no, this should be this much. And, it was just so stressful trying to do it all and keep a clean house and be a wife and navigate your body and all the changes that you're going through. And I also had some placenta left over. So I was really poorly after birth, but I didn't realise, and I had to have an operation, which was fine.
That's really serious.
Yeah, but I didn't know. So I was working, but in spite of all of that, I think there's lots I've learned if I were to have a second child.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, I did have a second child and, I learned some things. I learned a lot of things, but depends on the situation where the business is at and how you need it. The thing I really struggled with is you could take all the time off in the world, but mentally, if you're still having to answer questions, check in, it's still very difficult. I found it very, I don't know, it almost like was robbing me of time with I was sat breastfeeding in the most lovely, and I love breastfeeding, snuggly pose, looking at my gorgeous girl, and then having to be this bloody device just draining my brain when I just wanted to flow with love to my child.
It's a very different energy, isn't it? So switching between the two.
Yes, and switching between the two was just very difficult. And, I also struggled to relate to a lot of mum friends, new mum groups, because they were complaining about how stressful their life was. And everyone's life is stressful in different ways. But then it's just like, and then they're like, oh, when you do a bit of work, I'm like, well, yes, I have to. And then just...
Yeah, it's a really interesting journey what you're talking about there, because I think when you have people who are earning, I mean, say a really great salary, 30, 35K or whatever it is, but they're getting a wage, they're getting a maternity leave.
Yes.
So they can go and have coffee and cake. I mean, I did have coffee and cake. It was great, but I also wasn't getting a maternity leave. And I had a statutory income. Do you know? It's you've got to make it stretch. So every baby class you go to, you've got to make it work. Definitely. And you've got to choose. Well, I can't do this one because I'm doing that one. Or so it is. I found similar. I've actually got some great mom friends, but I do think that there is, when you then say, well, this is my circumstances. Well, you did choose that.
Of course.
And so that's what people say. And I find that really hard, because it's like, well, yes, I chose this, but it doesn't mean it's not hard sometimes.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean?
The financial responsibility and worries, and almost being kind of financially responsible for other people and other people's maternity leaves while you're trying to enjoy yours, even though the timing didn't quite work out for that. But, you know, it was just difficult because I was working so hard to necessarily afford someone that, you know, someone justifiably deserves their job. But I just struggled with that a little bit, you know. Sometimes as a business owner, you put yourself last, and you make sure everyone else is safe, protected.
Sometimes you pay yourself last. Yeah.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
It's certainly been the case lately for me.
Yeah.
Which is tough, especially when you have children, because you have to prioritize them. And that includes financially as well. So yeah, it's interesting. And did you suffer from guilt a bit when you started work?
I was actually really happy to be back at work. I loved it. I did miss her. And what I found more difficult was the guilt of not being able to work. And I found it as such a workaholic person where work had been so important to me, but also what I do, everything I do, I've designed to be things I love and passionate about.
Totally, yeah.
So if it's the thing that drives me and makes me so happy, why would I not want to do it? So it's actually really hard to not do the thing that you adore.
It's ingrained in my identity as well.
Yeah.
And for all, I loved the new identity of mum. I still needed that other identity as part of my life.
Exactly. Yeah. It's definitely a journey, but I mean, I am loving it. It's great. It's great to be a mom, and
it's a privilege, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
It's difficult at times. It's an absolute privilege.
Yeah, it is.
In your opinion, you know, as a business owner who is a female, or who identifies as female and can have children, do you feel that we are at a disadvantage someone who identifies as a man?
I do. Yeah, I feel that. I think life is what you make it. You can make opportunities happen sometimes, but I think that is that statement is with a caveat, because privilege comes into that. What are your circumstances? What are your starting points? You know, I think it's about sacrifice. So yes, you can have a business and a baby, but when you have a fledgling startup, it might be that the money just isn't there. And then it's like you say, well, what about the kids? They need to be fed. There needs to be stuff. You have to make sacrifices. So I do think we're still at a disadvantage. I'm very grateful that there are schemes like the government's statutory maternity allowance, which as a business owner I was able to access, because without that I wouldn't have had any income at all.
Yes.
And that gave me, it's funny, I'm not embarrassed to say this. So I'm someone who invests all my money back into the business all the time. So I haven't taken a wage for like a long time because I have chosen to grow my team and to grow my space and to improve my space. So
I go through phases of that, you know?
Yeah. But actually for me, the statutory maternity pay was the first time I was getting a wage for ages. It was actually wonderful, you know? So I think, but I just feel that so my husband and I are both business owners. So to answer your question, he can sit and do emails or text his team or do whatever he needs to on his phone, or go into work. But I've seen such a difference in how I'm able to do things now that I've never seen before. But you know, it's not as simple as me just trying to work at night with my laptop, because I'm still breastfeeding. My baby cries. I've got to feed her. I'm trying to sit there and type, but it's just a very uncomfortable situation. She keeps waking up. And the concentration, so I'm someone who does a lot of writing for clients. When I need to sit down and focus and write, I can't do that with the interruptions.
I understand.
Being neurodiverse as well, I need to have certain systems in place or things a certain way. And so I feel just watching his world and how much has changed for him. So I love the tech sector. I'm really inspired by new innovation happening all the time. And I know you are too, and a fan of tech. What I find hard is I used to love going to tech networking events or mingles. Yeah. He can go and do those things, but if I do, it's absolute hell for him at bedtime. You know, so I'm speaking at an event tonight, which is great, but it's 7 till 9, and I know it's going to be hell for him. When I went to the podcast show in London earlier this year, I just went for the day, and it was horrendous. You know, just non-stop crying because baby wants mommy. So totally. I think I'm not really sure what the answer is for us and how to bring that equity. But what I do feel is that I think there should be, I mean, I'm so grateful there is government funding now for nursery time, 15 hours a week for 9-month-olds, which is incredible. That's something that's new that some of my mom friends or other friends haven't been able to access before. So I think there are changes coming. But when I look at female founders, I work with lots of female founders and they're incredible. But how do we do it? The only time I know how to work is between midnight and 3 or 10 and 3, and it's exhausting.
Yeah, I was like 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. till whenever in the morning before they woke up. I haven't been up through the night. And I think the answer, firstly, I don't think there will be an answer to it until, you know, it's biological. And fortunately, it's an amazing experience, an honour to have that privilege of giving birth, growing, nurturing a child. But until, you know, and maybe it will happen until men can have babies, then I don't think there's an answer to it.
But I think society doesn't really value mums. I think that's changing.
Yeah.
Maybe I can rephrase that. For me, I do like in some ways I do like the idea of being more traditional, where you can stay at home with the baby if you want. But I don't think we're set up for single income families.
No.
You know, as in where you just have one income. You might have two.
Incomes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that was a big pressure.
So I think until that's fixed, what do you do? Exactly. I do think COVID presented opportunities for lots of women to be able to work at home, who maybe couldn't before, but then also it was very difficult for people who were also homeschooling. So, I distinctly remember somebody who had a 3-week-old baby, and she was just on all these business calls doing all these things, but she was just breastfeeding the baby, doing whatever. She was absolutely flying. Amazing. But she could.
Yes.
You know,
it allowed that. But sadly, things are going back more and more to normal all the time. We forget it.
Exactly.
But thank you for your answers.
Yeah.
They've been, goodness me, the trauma that you've been through, Ashleigh, and then your insight into things. It's been really lovely to hear. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Yeah.